delighted to be here with everybody. We're going to be spending about an hour together, and my goal is to educate you on the art of fresco painting, a little bit more about Ben Long, how to look at some of his paintings and get more out of them than just strolling by them. And also I'm going to talk to you about what's coming to Rumple. So the first question I always get, let me introduce Peggy Denny, my partner here. She will be helping me out. And she's changing slides. So the first question I get is, how in the world did I get into this fresco world? And it wasn't due to a career or education. The extent of my education was I took an art course in the 7th grade, and I remember making plaster of Paris little figures and painting them. But how I really got into this was there was a point in my life that I decided to make a bucket list. And one of the items on the bucket list was to drive the entire length of the Blue Ridge Parkway, 469 miles. I had bought a Jeep. So here's the stop on the Blue Ridge Parkway. It's an interesting milepost, 51, and it's called Punch Bowl Overlook. And if you can see, there's a blaze of the Appalachian Trail. And so all of these people bring bottles. If you had the big photo, there'd be hundreds of these bottles lined up. And they come and put those there for hikers coming through. So anyway, along the way, part of my career was at Bank of America, and I was in the building at the Bank of America when Ben Long was painting that large triptych painting. And that's the first time I ever heard of Ben Long. And from that, I heard that he had painted this really nice painting of the Last Supper up in the mountains. And I moved to Blowing Rock, and I decided, well, I want to go see that painting that I always heard about. So Peggy and I, along the way, stopped off and went to Glendale Springs and looked at that beautiful painting of the Last Supper. And when I was leaving, there was a little flyer there that said, there's another Ben Long fresco 6 or 8 miles away over in West Jefferson. So I said, hey, let's go over there and look at that one. And as many of y'all know that you've seen that, that's of Mary Child and 2 other frescoes. And we're about to leave there, and there was another flyer that was the Ben Long Fresco Trail. I didn't know there was such a thing as the Ben Long Fresco Trail. So I turned to Peggy and said, let's add this to our bucket list, that we're going to go see all of Ben Long's frescoes. And that listing wasn't complete because when that publication was done, Ben was still painting, and there were 2 or 3 other paintings that was not listed. So I went to Ben Long's website and copied down all the paintings that he had done, and you'll see that in a minute. And that became our list to go see all of the frescoes. And with each one, I learned a little more and a little more. So here's what we're going to cover. Why do we have fresco paintings? The art of fresco paintings. I've got a lot of props up here to share with you on that. Frescoes in the Carolinas. Who is Ben Long? The review of some of the North Carolina frescoes, and a little bit more about the lost fresco that's coming to Blowing Rock. Okay. So one of the things I learned is that why we have frescoes is it was the poor person's Bible. So back in the 13th, 14th century, there were very few Bibles, and most people were illiterate and couldn't read them anyway. So they started to learn the stories of the Bibles through art. And so that's why a lot of the large paintings became religious paintings, and they were seen in churches and there, so forth. Of the 13th century Bible, and think about, at this point, they were scripture or scrolls. All these were hand done, but they started illustrating some of them. So the person would do the writing, and then someone would come and start to illustrate some of the stories. So that began the beginning of illustrating some of the stories in the Bible. And as all y'all know, in the 1400s, the Gutenberg Bible finally was printed, and more people could have a Bible. Not that they could afford it or read it, but it was greater in circulation with churches and places like that. One of the most famous paintings is that of the Last Supper. Everybody has seen that. I'll talk about that in a minute because that is not a fresco. It's a mural on a wall, but it's not a fresco. The next one is that you'll see is Michelangelo's popular one in the Sistine Chapel. And I was telling some people that this was the first fresco Michelangelo had ever done. And he practiced a lot before he got to the middle part of the chapel to do that. And you can see how it has survived all of these years because it is done through the real fresco method, which you'll learn about in just a little bit. So there are two forms of fresco painting. They're both called murals because they're on the wall. But the Seco version is where it is the paint and the pigment is actually on the face of the wall. It is not in the wall. True fresco painting, the term fresco is Italian for fresh. So it is painted on fresh plaster, and you'll learn more about that in a minute. Seco painting is if you see any of the murals around West Jefferson or anywhere, it's an example of fresco painting. The earliest ones were by the cavemen finding pigment and other things to paint on the rock. There was a book published in Charlotte called Wet Wall Tattoos, and I mentioned to you I got a tattoo, and it's a lot like fresco painting in that the pigment goes into your skin, and it becomes part of your skin, and it stays there forever pretty much. The other kind of analogy is frescoes aren't on the wall, they're part of the wall. They become part of the wall. You'll learn in a minute how it requires a team of people. It is not one person up there painting away by themselves, but it requires a real team of people. Many of the large frescoes that you saw that Ben Long has painted, from the beginning to the end, took almost a year, from the very concept to the final completion of those paintings. Norma Sudworth is here, local artist. Norma, raise your hand if they don't already know you. So Norma and I worked to create some props for you. This metal frame and the expanded metal behind it is called a lathe, L-A-T-H. And you'll see later, this is what many of the frescoes that Ben Long painted, what he created in order to put the painting into the plaster. And so this is the way it starts, and there's 3 layers of plaster with every painting. The first is called the scratch coat or the rough coat. It has more coarse sand in the plaster. And then after that dries, and fresco artists will need to wait 30 days or more for that particular part to dry before they come back to the wall. Then they put on a second coat. It has a finer mixture of sand, and as you can see, becomes smoother. And then when it's the day to start painting, they only put enough fresh plaster for what they're going to paint that day. If the plaster dries before they're finished, they've got to take the plaster off and start all over again. If the plaster is too dry, it won't absorb the pigment as it's going in. So many of y'all, when you go to see these frescoes, look for what's called a day line. We were at a fresco in Charlotte, and the people there said, we've got a fresco here, but it's cracking. And I went up there and said, well, show me where it's cracking. And they said, we're pointing out the day lines to me. And it's not cracking, it's just where the 2 pieces of plaster were put from one day to the next. Some of the plasterers are more skilled than others when they created the day lines, and you sometimes tell that. So anyway, so then the final process is to get the painting onto the plaster. And so Norma did this. Here's what she used. So what you first do is sketch what you're going to paint. And then you take tracing paper and put over that and outline that sketch with lines. And then you take this stylus and you poke a hole all along that line that you just put on there. Norma, when she did this little one, put in 228 little holes to do that with.
And you can imagine these large frescoes. And they've been doing it this way since the 13th, 14th century. Ben Long did it with his. And it's a way of transferring the sketches. Peggy will show you some sketches here in a little bit to the plaster. And let me indicate to you, they do it twice. They first put it on this layer in order to position all of the paintings onto the surface. And then for the day that they're going to paint, they put the wet plaster on again and then pounce. It's called pouncing. Lisa's going to come up here in just a minute and show you how you do pouncing in order to get the painting onto the wet plaster. So you can see right here, that's what Norma did with all that little stylus. Then we put it over here and we pounce it, and it puts the little lines on there, and then you, quote, connect the dots. Lisa, if you'll come up here just a minute. So here's an example of a lady's face that has been traced, and there's all these little holes in there. Lisa, what do you feel behind that?
Pin pricks.
Pin pricks. Okay, now she's going to pounce this right here. So this is some red pigment, and it's similar to a carpenter with his blue line, where he wants to put a blue line, he pops it and takes the blue chalk and puts it onto the wood. So she's going to pounce this real hard. There you go, that's good. All right, now I want you to, they probably can't see that, so what do you see?
There's definitely a line of red dots.
Yes, so they do that on the entire painting. And you can imagine how much time that takes. Thank you, Lisa. With each painting, they create studies of what they're going to paint. So this is a concept of what they're going to do. It may be a scene, it may be characters, and they put this on what is called cartoons, and you'll see an example of a large cartoon in just a minute. Then they make detailed drawings of the models. And Peggy, if you'll come up, these are some actual sketches that show on some frescoes around North Carolina. This is a fellow named Derek that is in the Dome Fresco in Charlotte, one of the characters, but you can see the detail at which they do these paintings. And so this person sat for several hours while he was sketched. This was actually done by a local painter that worked for a man named Roger Nelson. This one right here, if any of y'all have been to Statesville, North Carolina, this one created quite a commotion in Statesville. This lady is in the center of the painting. She's the goddess of the crossroads there in that painting. But you can see the level of detail. And again, they're putting the tracing paper over that, getting the outline of her face, and then when they go to the wall, they're replicating. Ben Long never liked to use photographs. He always liked to use live models and do it that way. Here's a very nice one that's almost a complete person that you can see the level of detail that is done before it's even put onto the plaster. Okay, so Molly Bergstrom and Peggy are going to come up here. So this is a fresco at a restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina. And they're going to show you what the cartoon looked like that gave birth to that fresco. So all of that is done by charcoal. And imagine once you complete that, now you put tracing paper over the entire thing, trace all the lines, and transfer it to the larger painting. And there's a lot of detail, as you can see in there. See how this is blocked off with red lines? They actually do that on the wall itself. So when they go to put that tracing paper, they know where exactly on the painting to put that. Thank you, ladies. So before the painting actually begins, as I mentioned to you, they trace the outline up on the cartoon on vellum paper, make the holes, spread the final coat, and then tracing paper onto the wall. Then they start painting. All of the paint is made from elements that come out of the earth. if you wanted to paint orange, where would you go to get elements that would give you a nice orange?
Clay.
Clay, that's right. You could get a lot of orange out of North Carolina. Some of it comes out of Virginia, some comes from Italy, but it's all hand crushed and mixed with water. And it's all water and element, pigment. There's no other chemical that's added. Why would they start at the highest point? Dripping. Dripping. So they build their scaffolding up, they start at the highest point, and then they start painting down or moving the scaffolding as they go. They can repair drippings as they go down the painting. They'll often apply a base color. As I mentioned to you, it's very important that they keep the plaster moist, dry, not too dry. Okay, North Carolina is blessed to have all of these frescoes, mostly by Ben Long. So we've got 19 locations across North Carolina. Multiple locations have multiple paintings. There's 6 locations that have secular paintings, very interesting, and 13 have Christian theme paintings. All but 5 of these were done by Ben Long. So who is Ben Long? As I mentioned to you, he's from Statesville, North Carolina. He was a football player. He attended University of North Carolina, did not graduate there. He left 1 semester before graduating to join the Marines during the Vietnam War. He'd said he'd learned all he could from Carolina and it was going to take away. He became a combat Marine and later a combat artist. A lot of his sketches, his combat artist sketching, is in the National Marine Museum outside of Washington, D.C. Very interesting sketches he's done for that. He trained in 8 years under master fresco painter in Italy. He got some recognition as the only non-Italian to ever work on an Italian fresco. He got recognized for some of he actually did some frescoes in Italy that he started and was commissioned to do. He created a study abroad program with Meredith College and had an art studio in Paris. He operated a school in Nashville for 10 years for artists and training artists. That's where many of his models came from. This lady that Peggy showed you was one of the models. And his painting career lasted from 1974 to 2015. So what makes Ben's paintings interesting? So here's how to experience his paintings. So I want you to consider these as we go along. How he captured and depicted the scripture text. So how well did he read the scripture and depict that in the imagery that he put into the painting? Look for the elements he added to the painting that will help you understand the imagery. And you'll see that, I'll point that out to you. So, the people he has included in the paintings tell the story of his life. It's an autobiography of his life based on all the people in his life. So if you think back to 1974 at St. Mary's, that was his first wife with the first child in her tummy. She was the body model for that painting, but not the facial model. There are reoccurring appearances of objects in his painting. So if you go to see a lot of them, you'll start to say, oh, I saw that one over there. And I saw that same object somewhere else. And there are a couple of examples. I'll point out a couple to you. Red cloth, ropes. If you see the one at St. Mary's again, above Mary with Child is an ellipse of the sun. Well, that same ellipse image appears in the Bank of America secular painting as well. So then you start to say, well, what's the occurrence there? What does it mean? Ben won't tell you. You have to kind of figure that out for yourself. Ben plays a really fun game by hiding his signature. This is what his signature looks like, very stylized B and an L. And it's never where you expect it to be, in the lower right-hand corner. I was doing a fresco tour last week, and I offered a prize to the first person that could find his signature in that painting in Statesville. And they looked and they looked and they looked. Finally, one lady finally found it. So I'll point that out to you in a couple of paintings that we go over. The other thing, a lot of addition of unlikely characters and objects to make the viewer contemplate what the world does that mean. I'll point some of those out as well. And then tributes and memorials. And a lot of his paintings, they're tributes to people, they're memorials to people based on family members, friends, enemies, stuff like that in his painting. So let's go look at a couple of them. So who've seen this one? John the Baptist. Okay, so you can very quickly look. Here's an object. That's a bumblebee. That is right there. Okay, why did Ben put that bumblebee in there? Anybody know the story of John the Baptist where he lived on honey? Okay, yep. So maybe that's why he did that. Ben told somebody else, well, the bee was just flying around and landed on the windowsill, so he put him into the painting. Here's the dove. Oftentimes you see the dove coming down, Ben put it going up. Now I want you to make note, we're going to look at the staff right here in just a minute. So Peggy, move me to the next one. If you look at this real close, right in the staff, it says for Andrew. He's a tribute to a fellow that helped him with his painting named Andrew, but you would never hardly tell it's in that staff. The other thing, here's a tribute down in the lower right-hand corner. He usually would date him, and this is another gentleman that helped him, Ron Taylor. Here is Ben's signature. Okay. Okay, back up to. Up, go up. It is right there. But you would look and look and look and hardly ever find that. Okay, this is such a great painting. Everybody probably has seen this one. Ben completed this one after he did St. Mary's, and he thought he'd really get started with more frescoes, but he didn't get his next commission for almost 8 or 9 years, and that was in Charlotte at St. Peter's Catholic Church. So Ben went back to Paris and did his schooling and so forth. But there's a lot of extra little things in here. Here's the bowl that Christ was washing the disciples' feet with. Right here is a little note. The last word in that note is falcon, and that shows up in another one of his paintings somewhere. It's a tribute to his father. Ben loved dogs, even though the commissioners of his paintings didn't like dogs, and he would put dogs in most of his paintings. Almost 50% of his paintings have dogs in them. And then here's this white character thing up there that Ben won't tell you what it's for. People speculate. It was a tribute to his father, who had a massive heart attack while Ben was painting this painting, and he put it up there. But it's for the viewer to determine what they think it is. This is one of my favorite paintings that Ben has done in Montreat. So let's go look at this. So beautiful Gothic arches. Again, this is the story of Return of the Prodigal Son. So here's a good example of Ben, what he has done with the scripture. So this is the father and the return of the son. This is the older brother that's really upset about things. Now, there was nowhere mentioned in the scripture about a mother. So Ben added the mother of the sons to that. And look at the expression on her face. And think about the scripture. She is conflicted. The father's ecstatic that the son has come back. She knows her older son is really upset about everything. But look how he positioned that. Here's the clothes that the father's asked to bring the clothes to the son. So let's talk about Blowing Rock and what I call the lost shepherd. So Peggy and I had gone to see, I think, all of the paintings but one. And so these were the locations of Ben Long's frescoes. All of them were in North Carolina but one. And that was Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. And these were the locations of the other frescoes that Ben's proteges have done. Peggy and I started researching, and this is what we could find on Ben's website. We knew it was in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. It was the Hospice of Charleston. It was called 23 Psalm 2009 when he completed it. It was in a chapel in that hospice facility, and it was commissioned by Mabel Stowe Query. And that's all that was available to us on the website. So we researched and researched. Nothing would show up on Google. Up here in the green is what we knew. So with the research, we determined that she died in 2007 before the painting was completed. We learned that Hospice of Charleston went out of business or changed names, sold out in 2008. So that's why it didn't appear in Google. And it was purchased and operated by another company from 8 to 15. It didn't show up in Google either. Then they sold out to Kindred Healthcare, who operated from 2015 to 2018. And finally, after a lot of research and digging, I mean, we went to the courthouse, we went to the Register of Deeds, everywhere we could imagine, and found out that Roper St. Francis Hospital was operating as a hospice facility in 2018. Subsequently, they have sold it to another company. Now this is the tenant. This is not who owns the building. So we know who commissioned it. We know who's there. So one Sunday afternoon, we went and knocked on this door. This is the facility. We finally were able to find out the address. That's where it was. And it was interesting enough, so we knocked on the door Sunday afternoon, and we said, can we come in and look at the fresco? So we walk into this room, and here's this lovely 16-foot by 6-foot painting of Psalm 23. And unbeknown to anybody was another large fresco. This was about 8 feet by 5 feet of the Good Shepherd. So there were two of them in this chapel right there. And I'm kind of a curious guy, and I said, well, you know, we've only got one of these in South Carolina. What if we could move it to North Carolina? Then would be, all of them be the North Carolina frescoes. So I did some research and found out the descendants of Mabel Query Stowe, and they were real good Presbyterians. Some of them lived in North Carolina, some still in Mount Pleasant. And I got to know this fellow right here, Dick Query, pretty well, just over the phone and through email. So he was real interested in what I was doing because he understood that very few people ever went in there to see what his mother had commissioned Ben to do. So as I mentioned to you, Hospice of Charleston back then owned the building and was the tenant at the same time. When they sold their operation to that other company, they still remained tenant of the building, owner of the building, but they changed their name to Hospice of Charleston Foundation. Then, lo and behold, they changed their name again to Bridges for End of Life, and then again they changed to Bridges of Hope. So in the real estate records, we finally found Bridges of Hope. And that's all I knew at that point. So I was trying to figure out how in the world I'm going to find out who is a person that I could talk to at that organization. And I called Roper General Hospital and got the finance director on the phone. And I said, I got a crazy question to ask you, but I want to know who you're sending checks to for your rent for the hospice facility that you have over there on that street. And he gave me this guy's name right here. So I contacted him, And I said, here's a question for you. Would you ever consider letting that painting be moved? And he paused a minute and said, well, we might. And that kind of shocked me. And so he said, let me get back to you. And so at that time, I contacted Dick Query, and I said, would you support, if we could move that to North Carolina, would you allow that to happen? He actually didn't have any control over it, but since it was his mother's commission, he said, yeah, I think that would be good. We'd love for it to go to Montreat. And I said, well, Montreat's already got a Fresco. he had property there at Montreat. They were very, very active Presbyterians. And I said, well, they've already got one, and I live in Blowing Rock. What if I could get it to Blowing Rock? That'd be good. That'd be good, too. So here's what happened. Bridges of Hope will consider selling the paintings. I offered it to Blowing Rock Methodist Church. I'm a Pres Methodist. And a good friend of mine's the chair of the board there, and he said, well, that's interesting. The preacher really was interested in it. And he came back, because I said, if you want to have it in your church, you got to make it open to the public. And, you know, they're closed for part of the year. And they came back and said they didn't like the naked man in the painting. So that killed that. So then I contacted Rumple, and there's a funny story about that. So October prior to this time, I had taken my dog to be blessed, and it was blessed over at St. Mary's Church by Kathy Beach. That was my only contact with the pastor there, was Kathy Beach. So I called her, and I got this nice lady on the phone, and I said, you know, I'm calling with a crazy question, but I need to talk to your minister. And she said, well, what's it about? And I said, well, I want to move a Fresco to Blowing Rock. And I could hear her say, Kathy, there's somebody wanting to move a Fresco to Blowing Rock. And Kathy said, and some of y'all anybody go to Presbyterian Church here? So you know some of the story, is that Kathy wouldn't have taken my call had it not been for, is it Rick Wilson? Was that his first name? Had this dream about 2 to 3 weeks before, Bill Wilson, that's right, that they were going to get a Fresco painting. And Bill Wilson was in charge of Coma at the time Ben Long did that fresco in Morganton. And so he was familiar with frescoes, but he came into Kathy and said, and this was before me calling, came into Kathy and said, I had this dream, we're going to have a fresco. And so when I called, she said, had Bill Wilson not come to see me, I would have just told the lady, I'm not going to take that call. So I go in there and meet with Kathy, and she gets a little committee together real quick, Coley and a few others. And so then we had to get to work. Can it be moved? And how much would it cost to move? And through another avenue, I'd learned that you could move frescoes. St. Peter Catholic Church had a lot of their frescoes fall off the wall. And so I learned that you can actually move these things if you're careful. So we learned how much it would cost to move it, and it could be moved. So I went back to Bridges of Hope, and Cully did a really good job of negotiating the fee for that fresco. Now, Mabel Query Stowe paid $400,000 for it, and Cully got it for the church for $200,000, which is a pretty good deal.
For both of them?
Yeah, both of them, yeah. So interesting thing was, we later learned, and you saw this slide where Roper is no longer operating a hospice facility there. It's another type of facility, not a hospice. Jonathan Wright knew that was going to happen. So it was ironic that somebody would come and offer to buy that fresco because they were going to have to paint it over. So anyway, Cully negotiated that, and we spent a lot of time, and finally on October the 12th, we transported it to a fine art museum in Charlotte. And there it's been sitting for almost 19 months now, waiting for the Annie Cannon building to be renovated to support this fresco that's going in there. This was not going to be an easy task. So I had to get a welder, a fabricator, a fine art mover involved, and they made this special frame to put the painting in once we got it off the wall. So you think about a glass truck that runs around, it's got an angle. So this is kind of the theory behind that, is we put this, and we estimated it was going to weigh about 1,000 pounds. Now remember, it's got 3 coats of plaster and a metal frame, and it's 16 feet wide. So we figured out that when they put the painting up, they put this big metal frame up first and mounted it to the wall through this. There was no plaster there, so all the mounting was behind the plaster, okay? So we got all these people in there, and they put some cameras behind the painting to see what was there, and they determined they could, with a welding torch, cut the brackets off and free the painting from the wall. And we had to get the fire marshal in there. Now remember, this is a hospice facility, oxygen is everywhere. We had to get the fire marshal in there, position fire trucks out there, the whole thing. So these are sparks coming off of the welding torch. We were starting a bunch of little fires, and we've got a video of this that we're going to show once the painting gets in place, but you'll find out that we bought a crate of water bottles and poked a hole in the top of every one, and that was our fire extinguishers. We would go around and spew. So we got pictures of Cully and me, spewing the little fire out. But here's what they've done. Now, here they are. You can see where this painting was attached to the wall, and that's all the burnt marks where they cut the metal brackets to get it off the wall. So they had all this heavy-duty equipment in there with forklift and stuff, and it was supposed to raise it up and put it on that frame in the room, and we were going to roll it out. Well, none of the equipment would raise it up, and we couldn't figure out what in the world was wrong. Well, we learned once we opened this up, see this right here? This is concrete. Let me hold this for me. See how neatly that looks on the back? They didn't put anything on the back side to stop the concrete from extruding through the back. And concrete, why they did that, I don't know. But it weighs 5 times as much as plaster does. He's an architect, you probably know that, don't you? And so you can see, there's another layer or 2 of plaster on the back side of this thing. So we had, these mover guys were just phenomenal. They would go outside and we would try plan A, plan B, let's go to plan C. So now they decided they would just let it sit in these straps and try to move it out that way because they couldn't lift it up to put it on the rack. So that's it going out the door. So now once we get it outside, they were able to raise it, put other straps on, raise it up enough to get it into that rack. Now the scary thing was, here you go, they're putting one end of it on the bed of the truck, and this has got to go up at the same time that's going up in order to pass it into the truck. Well, we did that, and it's safely in Charlotte. Now the trick's going to be leave here and go out the front door, look 2 stories up, and we're going to knock out a big window there and open the door, and we hope to take this 2,000 pounds, not 1,000 pounds, take that up and slide it into that room, and we're going to have some metal piers made to hang it at that point. So, let's see what's next. That's it.